Tēnā te mihi nui kia koutou. Welcome to Board Talks. You would have just heard that we are recording this session and all of our Board Talks go up on our website, which you can access post-talk. And we also have a new podcast that all of Board Talks are now on. We'll share a bit more of that with you later. Ko waio, ko Rotiha Tokuingoa. I'm the Chief Executive of Community Governance Aotearoa. And I'm pleased to bring you our Board Talk series. So we have for you today Youth on Boards in Aotearoa, where we're going to explore how youth make decisions to take action and strengthen organisations, communities and society in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We do like to kick off straight at like 12 o'clock, but just as everyone's kind of joining us, if you'd like, please put your name and where you're from, or the not-for-profit that you represent into the chat function. So we're just a little bit of housekeeping. We like to ask people to keep themselves on mute. But you can ask our panel guests questions as we progress as well. So if you'd like, you can just share where you are zooming in from. Kia ora, Nate from Hatohone St. John. One of our panelists, Irfaan from Pakistan Association. We're going to hear from him soon. A few people just joining on. Cheryl, Green Friends Charity, Kirsty, CSI Auckland, kia ora Kirsty, Mike from Waiheke. Got some amazing places people are zooming in from. I did think I might ask a question about just to get to know everyone a bit more, but I thought I'm not sure if it's going to distract everyone, but I thought you might want to share who's going to be your World Cup rugby final score and winner with in the chat. It might pique some interest from everyone. So what do you mean? Of course, it's going to be the All Blacks Monday. Got Catherine from West Auckland, kia ora. Jeremy from DIA, Hapai Hapori, Pami, kia ora Jeremy. Amanda from Odyssey House in Christchurch. Just nice to see who's online with us, just as everyone's kind of coming on into the talk today. So Board Talks was developed to highlight key topics of interest and to hear from thought leaders who work and volunteer in the not-for-profit space. We are now into our second year and we have a growing audience. We thank you very much for your support and for taking the time to join with us on our Board Talks. We're now having almost 170 to 200 people per talk, and we've now over 1,000 people who have joined our Board Talks over the last 2 years. This Board Talk is about youth on boards, and we have another one coming up to wrap up the year, which is about wellbeing, which is a nice one to kind of ease us out into the year in December. I'd just like to thank our sponsor as well, which is Havana Coffee Works. You might notice the background screen. They provide our panelists with a nice coffee pack and a cup, and we really appreciate their support. Lots of people, oh, happy Friday. Happy Friday, Miriam. Girl Guiding New Zealand. Wayne Francis Charitable Trust, kia ora, Jen. No one's brave enough to put the score in of the rugby, so it's probably wise, isn't it? So today our Board Talk is about youth and governance, and we've got a special addition to this Board Talk because we have our co-host, which is April from the Community Governance Aotearoa team. So she's going to be co-hosting and moderating this talk with me, which is going to be a great addition. Before I introduce April, we're just going to our guest with us today, Irfaan from Pakistan Association of Otago, Lily McFarlane from Philanthropy New Zealand, and Tipene James from Tipene, Kōkiri. They will get a chance to introduce themselves and where they're from, so they're looking forward to hearing from them. But now I'm going to hand it over to my co-host, first ever co-host, so very excited to have April with us. And you can introduce yourself now. April, kia ora.
Kia ora, Rose. Kia ora koutou, no ototahi e noho ana ahau. Ko kai ruruku kaupapa ki community governance Aotearoa ahau. Ko April toko ingoa. Kia ora everyone, my name's April. I'm the project coordinator at Community Governance Aotearoa. And yeah, really delighted to be stepping into the co-host role today and hearing from our awesome guests. So myself, with my youth governance experience, I started a charity after finishing high school and found a few people to join that board with myself, some amazing people with governance experience, and now have a little over 7 years governance experience in that role. And today we have 3 amazing guests. So next up, I'm going to hand over to themselves to introduce themselves. So if you'd each like to share your name, the organisation you represent, and also share a little bit about that organisation or kaupapa. Tipene, would you like to start us off?
O kia ora koutou, ko Tipene James tōku ingoa, nō roto rua hau, he uri tēnei no Ngāti Whakauwi. Nice to meet you all. Though it says there I represent Puni Kōkiri, I am actually a trustee on multiple other entities. So though I work at Puni Kōkiri, my background in terms of governance actually comes from my iwi background and also university background. So I'm currently on a treaty settlement entity, also a former marae trustee, have been on multiple youth boards through university, and also ahu whenua advisor and trustee on multiple blocks. Yeah, I have a fair experience in governance, but that's a little bit about me. I don't want to carry on. I'll pass on to Lily.
Kia ora. Yeah, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Lilio. I'm beaming in from Te Motu Kairangi, the Miramar Peninsula in Te Whanganui-a-Tara. And we've got a beautiful day here, which I swear happens more often than not. As mentioned, I work with Philanthropy New Zealand. I came to interact with governance later in life from a youth perspective. So it's quite a recent thing for me. And I guess my context is that I coordinate the youth advisory group that the PNZ board has, as well as having youth representatives on the board. So I kind of have a wraparound role in terms of pushing that forward and sort of building entire youth rōpū within the sector. So yeah, thank you for having me. And I'm just excited to hear what my other panelists have to say. So I'll pass to Irfaan.
Kia ora everyone, my name is Irfaan, and yes, I'm from the Pakistan Association of Otago. I'm head of student and youth wing there, and very recently appointed General Secretary at Pakistan Association of Otago, but I also sit on a couple of other boards as well. I'm also very recently appointed co-president of the Otago International Students Association, which is an organization that falls under the Otago University Students Association. And it's basically a club and society affiliated to OUSA and focuses more on international students. I feel that, you know, there's a bit of a mix between international students and of course helping out with the Pakistan community, and of course working with other communities within Aotearoa and in particular in Dunedin. And speaking of Dunedin, we just had some snow over here, so it's good. Just a brief interlude of snow before the sun comes out again. So yeah, it's a good day to have a nice korero.
Kia ora. Oh, thank you so much everyone for introducing yourselves. And yeah, welcome as panel guests to the talk. We're really stoked to have each of you sharing in your diverse experience that you've got with youth and governance. So we'll get right into the questions. So we've got a number of questions, and I'll put one out there, and then whoever would like to speak to it, just go ahead. So the first question that we've got is, what defines youth and governance? There might be some different perspectives on this, but what would be the age group of youth that you would each set?
Well, I think it's probably quite different for all of us, as you pointed out, because for me, I think, you ultimately, for charters and that sort of thing, have to often get a number down on paper. And I find that is usually sort of first based on the skew of your sector in terms of age. So the philanthropic sector traditionally probably skews a bit older than the community sector a lot of the times. So maybe, rangatahi or youth to us, that cutoff might be a little bit higher. But going beyond that, I've often found it quite arbitrary to set or to focus on the number, and instead we kind of focus on the wave of new ideas. Because what I've come across is there are some young people by number definition who have very old ideas and very traditional ideas, and vice versa. You have some people who by definition are older but have very young, new, fresh ideas. And so we try to put more emphasis on, who is bringing in and carrying in these new wave of ideas that are based on new experience and younger experiences. So I think we more try to put that emphasis on the tuakana taina role, and rather than really focusing on those age groups. But it can get complicated when you need to write something down. But it's not always simple.
I guess I'll go next. For within, I guess the circles that I sit within, rangatai and youth, quite similar to Lily. It's quite a, for some reason, it seems to be quite a touchy subject for some, and in particular in some of the governance roles I hear, a lot of my elders tend to go, youth is someone that sits within the age of 30 to 40 in terms of governance. And to me, that's quite funny. I don't really see that kind of age group as youth. I tend to see it at 18, 24. And one thing we tend to miss out is that age bracket a lot. And so I really, when I look towards university associations and groups, I think a lot of that builds a lot of the foundations for many of the youth in governance right across the country. That's a really touchy subject. But for myself, I'll say between the age of 18 and 24, however, within the circles that I sit within, they say it's between the 30s and 40s.
For me, basically, I come from Singapore, and we follow this definition that is defined by the United Nations, which says that individuals between the ages of 15 to 24, so not far from Tipene's idea, and they are defined as youth. And it's actually a commonly used definition, not just in Singapore, but also around the world. It's adopted in 1985, and it's based on the World Programme of Action for Youth. But having said that, I also agree with Lily's idea, and on the fact that you shouldn't look at the age group as you shouldn't look at numbers to actually define youth in the context of youth governance, because it's also including the form of experiences that people have and being able to contribute to youth in general. So moving to the second part of the question, which is in the context of youth governance, where obviously the youths are very much engaged in social, political, cultural activities, all kinds of activities in diverse New Zealand, and getting involved in youth-related issues. So I think having youth governance is important when you get youths involved in youth organizations, but obviously taking it one step further and getting youths involved in the organizations that matter to New Zealand. So for instance, being involved in development initiatives, even being involved in lawmaking, and getting involved in politics as well. And in my line of work, also along with the fact that I run my radio show, OAR-FM, where I talk to some politicians. I even speak to young youth politicians. I very recently spoke to Ethan Rio. He's a youth and also running for ran for parliament. So these are also very important if we're going to talk about youth in governance, whether the youths are actually being able to get into organizations that matter and that can actually make a profound difference across New Zealand.
Awesome. Yeah, some really great thoughts there. And it is interesting how it's not one set age group, isn't it? I think there'll be a few people here. It looks like someone messaged in the chat, stoked that they're still in the youth age group. That's awesome. But I think kind of leading into our next question, it does kind of beg the question around, getting those fresh ideas in. We all start our governance journeys at different points. So we may be very young in terms of our governance journey. And I think maybe with governance is like it can be with work. It can be that sort of chicken or the egg scenario where you need experience to get the job, or you need the governance experience to get the role sometimes. So how can we support people into governance roles? So yeah, the next question that we do have is, how can not-for-profits support a young person into a governance role? So you might want to share a bit about your experiences and what you've seen done in this space.
So I think, if I may go with this question first, I think one factor in my own personal life when I get involved into a governance role across my youth volunteering activities, especially in Pakistan Association Otago, is that there's an inclusive environment for mentorship and guidance. And I think having the inclusive environment first is very important. People in these organizations, and not just the youth organizations, but overarching NGOs, need to understand that there's a diverse representation that is necessary. And this means including the youths as well as part of their boards, which is very important because they bring fresh ideas, perspectives, and approaches. And for these youths to be able to polish these ideas, because you can have an idea, you can have plans and policies, but you don't have a framework to do it, and you don't know how to run an organization. So that brings to the main point of what I want to say, which is mentorships and support. So yes, we can have mentorship programs, we can have networking and dialogue sessions, but nothing beats bringing a youth into the organization, getting him into the role as a youth leader, for instance, focusing on youth, but at the same time getting a form of mentorship and guidance from people who have already been in that field. So Pakistan Association of Otago is filled with people from all walks of careers. They have business people, they have also people from the sciences and research sector, but in a non-government organization, these people come together and train youths. And this is not just in power, obviously, it's on a lot of organizations having mentorship programs where experienced board members guide and support young individuals. And not just having trainings and workshops, but they're very important to have trainings and workshops about organizational management and all. But the mentorship, which is a one-on-one individual mentorship, is very important. Not just in non-government organization. As I was from Singapore helping out in my organizations, I volunteered with Deputy Prime Minister Heng in his constituency as a guest writer. That was also one of my very first experience with mentorship, because I understudied him in his work, serving his community. And so I had a framework and knew exactly what I would actually have to expect. So in the case I do enter politics, which I do plan to, but I would know what to expect when I get into that role, and start training it and start building that foundation from now and polishing up where possible. So mentoring and support is very important to get youths more involved in NGOs.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Irfaan. And I think, yeah, mentoring is such a valuable thing that boards can offer to someone starting in their role and someone earlier in their governance journey. Yeah, how about yourselves, Tipene, Lily? Any things that you've seen that have worked well?
Yeah, I'm quite similar to Irfaan, that in terms of mentoring, it's quite similar if I look towards my experience, one of the first boards I was on was a marae board. And the main part of that was just succeeding me into some of my roles, and just getting to understand governance within a safe space with my parents, with my grandparents, with my uncles, with my aunties, to be able to make mistakes. And I think that's a real key thing in terms of being able to get youth into governance, is ensuring that it's a safe space for them to be able to share information, to be able to make mistakes, but in particular, understanding some of the 101s with governance. I think that's kind of where it breaks down. In terms of some of my communities that we work within, I think one of the main things that really worry youth is actually we don't understand governance, and we don't understand the breakdown. It's not taught with us in schools. It's not taught with us with any of our social things that we do. So I think that's a real key component in terms of getting youth involved in governance, is ensuring that youth get to understand some of the 101 of governance, because at the end of the day, they're just frightened, and they're just sometimes they're just being told to jump on these boards. And so yeah, if there's anything that I could to answer that question would be making sure it's a safe space for rangatahi youth, making sure that there are some teachings and learnings for them in terms of basic 101s of governance, but also same as Irfaan, is making sure that there's mentorship, succession planning for the youth. And that's, to me, is how you know, yeah, but hopefully that answered the question. Sorry for rambling on.
Yeah, tautoko, what both have just said, completely agree. I think maybe something I'll add a bit more specific maybe to my sectors, sort of the first question I come to people with is, why do you want a young person? You know, we know why we're awesome, but I often see there's a gap between boards knowing that they're meant to have a young person, because that's just what's, you know, the expectation these days, versus being able to tell you why they think that is a really great thing to have. And we've been in situations where we've said, give us a list of reasons why you're so excited to have a young person on your board. And actually, there can be some difficulty when they actually try to think about that. And I think that's what kind of brings me to the point, and Tipene said about it, like creating safe spaces. I think I've watched boards get really good because they do similar things with Māori representation, Pasifika representation, all sorts of representation of marginalized groups. They think about what work are we going to do first to make sure that if we're to bring someone in, they're not going to be alone. And it doesn't mean that you need to have a buddy for them. So you don't necessarily need to have two young people to make it a safe space. It's actually way more helpful and important that the existing board members do the work to learn to understand youth culture, youth experience, youth trends. And there are so many opportunities to do that. And I think only after you've done that work is it ever going to be a safe space to bring a young person in. So yeah, it's really stripping it right back of why we're even doing this, you know?
So you've seen a couple of
oh, sorry, you go ahead, Irfaan.
Yep, thanks. I just saw one of the question asking, is it important to exempt those seeking experience from government accountability? I think no, the answer is no, because everyone has to be accountable. You're running an NGO, it's a not-for-profit organization. There are obviously rules governing it. And so my answer to that is that it is not, yes, you learn to run an organization, you learn to seek experience, but government accountability, trust, integrity, they go along with your learning processes. So you can't really exempt them for that. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that as well.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I guess actually this question kind of that we've just talked about dovetails a bit into the next one. And the question is around, and Lily, you might want to kick us off on this one. I know that you've convened a group for young people advising. Are there challenges of being on a board as a young person that boards can mitigate? So yeah, maybe if there's, I don't know, if there's one or two kind of challenges that young people might specifically face that boards can be thinking about in that preparation and the intentionality.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, I think the number one thing that's like unsurprising because of generational differences, and which seem to be accelerating. Like I'm 25 and I have no idea what 20-year-olds are going through these days, whereas I have a lot in common with 30-year-olds, and I've just noticed that those differences are just accelerating. so I think what you've got is a generation that just does things differently and interacts differently and enjoys different sort of spaces, and actually perhaps doesn't have the same view of work and structure that our older generations do. We've just grown up in a world we've had more freedom to question rigid structures and these sorts of things, and our minds are there, but we're still participating within systems that are still dominated by these rigid structures. And so that's a really frustrating tension when you're a young person trying to participate in these spaces. And I guess my one tip for those spaces is like always asking why and like what else. So I read an amazing piece on Institute of Directors or something the other day about how moving and seconding, like in a meeting, doesn't actually have any legal basis, and that you don't have, most of the time, don't need to be doing it. Yet most of our boards continue to choose to do this process, and it's thinking about, well, why? If we don't have to do it, why are we still doing it? And if that why is because we're trying to uphold these traditional structures and things that we've just done forever, it's just not a very good reason. And that's what's making it hard for your young people, because I assure you, they're coming in and going, why? They're good why people. And if you can't give them a good why, they're just going to get frustrated. But then once you got that why, if it's not a good answer, it's, well, what else? And that's the cool thing about young people, is that they're dreamers. I think the longer you're in a sector, you can try as hard as you can, but the dominant narratives start to seep in, and a bit more of a group think starts to happen. And so the perk of being young and new is that you've just got all your own ideas. And it's some of the most objective thinking I've ever seen. So we're there to help with the what else, but create space for there to even be a what else to explore. I just don't think boards and governance needs to be as tedious as it is. I hear everyone complain about it, even the old people on boards. They're like, this is so boring, all that. And it's like, we can do something about that. And your young people can help with that dreaming and envisioning. So yeah, I just encourage leaning into them on that.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Lily. Anything to add to that, Tipene, Irfaan? Awesome questions coming through in the chat as well. I might, at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Rose, who's got some more questions for our panel.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And thanks to April, our co-host for our board talk. So very insightful feedback coming through from the panelists. Yeah, I was just thinking about this because some of the questions that I have been thinking about is a little bit about what Lily and Tipene and Irfaan have kind of been saying, which is about the civic value for youth in governance. Often I was really interested to know how you kind of came about your first kind of governance role. Sometimes it might be through a school or committee, might be marae committee or through whānau. But often youth, we don't share the value of governance enough when you're younger. So not everyone is actually exposed to governance practice, boards, not-for-profits, which is a real shame because we do majority of all the grassroots work we do is in the NFP NGO sector. So we're a substantial sector, yet within, say, a schooling system, you're not really aware of boards, that kind of thing, unless you got a little bit of a political lens, like you might be going on school councils and you go on to youth group advisory through your local councils, all those kind of pathways. So yes, just picking up what our youth team is saying, what can we do to kind of change the shape for growing our youth and from that kind of early ages? What do you think? What can we do? Who's got some good ideas?
Actually, I don't have a big idea on this, but what it brought up for me, like a very, very simple level. And because we've talked about mentoring, and we often talk about it in quite like a structured way of mentoring programs and all these sorts of things. But something I've noticed of being in quite in spaces where I'm often the youngest person there, it's rare that someone in a position of experience or governance or anything will approach me and engage me to learn about me or to even just meet me, and that often the burden of networking or connecting falls on the young person to be aspirational and confident enough that they reach out. And so I think, you know, before we even get to that place, it's like, actually, how are we just showing up for young people as peers, and, you know, building that respect person to person, and even putting in just a little bit of additional effort. If you're at a conference and you see a young person, and just show some interest, because we don't get that very often. And when we do, like from personal experience, I can say it means so much, like so much. So I guess that's maybe just some encouragement if you are someone in that position.
Yeah, I think this is touching on a bit of what Talia's question is in the chat. So how do you find opportunities to give youth the chance to have challenging conversations in governance spaces? So really having a voice at the table. Sometimes you might think as an organisation or a board, you want to appoint a younger person to the board, get a youth perspective on, and then they might feel isolated that they can only talk about youth topics. And then you kind of just think, oh, I can only talk about that because it's to do with young people stuff. But that's not why you're there. That's not why you should be there too. You're not just there as a to represent all youth or all diversity, that kind of thing. So have any of you experienced that in your governing roles that you might like to share? Because I think it will shed a light on challenging conversations and how you can feel as a youth on a board. Tipene?
Yeah, I guess if I start there, sorry if I've cut anyone off, but I think it varies right across. Like let's say I use my university experience, for example. We're willing to have those hard discussions with each other, and quite frank discussions. Because I think what it is we feel as if for us as a youth, we're all at a similar level. It must be because of our age, obviously. And for us, those seem to be the most productive conversations that we tend to have. And those seem to be the moving and shaking conversations that need to be had. But see, when I say it varies from board to board, so I'm on I've been on multiple boards, from Marae to Treaty Settlement to Ahu Whenua, where I have some older people, like my grandparents and that, for example, where I feel as if I can't challenge in that space, as you've mentioned, because I'm a youth. And I don't know really what the answer is to be able to support that. But what I can say is one thing and one practice that one of the chairs that I've been involved with is he continues to go around the boardroom and ensure that rangatahi has a voice. Though it's only a little bit of a voice, it still gets our voice out there, because sometimes we feel as if, and this is, I can only speak from my experience, as if that those older boards can be a little bit daunting. And so when I seem to challenge things, I feel a little bit scared. I don't know why that is. So yeah, hence the reason I say it varies from different boards. So I tend to not have such of a impact, I guess, on some of those older boards. I don't know if that answered the question, but that I just wanted to highlight how everything kind of varies from board to board.
Yeah, I think we can see that in our boards when a youth is appointed, it does, you tend to see that they might only provide feedback or decisions on what they think is youth related topics. But when it is a youth organisation and specifically set up for youth delivery or services or kaupapa, it's a bit different because you're with your peers. So it's a bit more of a natural space to challenge one another. So that is probably a great space to be in, because you can really lean into your governance skills sets there. I'm just going to pick up a bit about Mike's got a question in there around membership organisation represents environmental charities. And a bit about high-level experience, but then how do you get governance experience as well when you're going from locally through to nationwide? So these are these membership structures, and how do they support? But have you got any thoughts about that? Because I've got some thoughts about it myself. How would you support youth to kind of progress through, especially a membership organisation, and so they can be in those leadership roles?
I guess my initial part-time, maybe it's because I don't know a whole lot about this organization, but what stood out to me was that that's necessitated in the first place. So is it that that can shift and that isn't necessitated, or is that kind of a fixed thing? Because that's ultimately what gives birth to your question, and what makes the difficulty is that that's the requirement in the first place. It's often those requirements that get in the way of making the progress.
Yeah, again, it's like, what are you trying to serve? What's your purpose? You've got to have those systems set up. So there was another comment in there around maybe learning bad practice from, you might come into a board and they don't have really good governance practice. So you have to be aware that, are you actually governing well enough to bring in a younger person? Because then you're kind of teaching bad habits to our next generation of leaders. So that's not a good thing either. I kind of wanted, what do you think, Tipene?
Yeah, I thought I'd touch on that because I've actually had that experience myself. And I'll go back to my Marae experience, for example. Many of them are just painters, don't like to work within governing settings. And so they don't understand how governance works. And so I think for my first years, it was really hard because of that, because they didn't have any governing skills or didn't understand it. But I think within that, one of my biggest learning curves from it is being able to understand that's what actually happens on current governing boards, and for us to assume that everyone's going to be as perfect like every other board is, I don't know what the word will be for, but in terms of that, it was a great learning curve for myself, because I was able to see some of the things that I don't want to follow on from, and that there were some conflicts of interest. There was a huge one that I noticed on there where they're employing their son to do the building and they employed him, so some of those types of issues were raised. And it wasn't until a year later where I found, when I sat in other governing boards, where I understood that was a bad practice. So it's through actually experience the bad practice, I understood it was a bad practice. Sometimes people can tell me it is a bad practice, and then it goes one ear and out the other. But it's not until I've seen it and then I can actually action the next steps afterwards. So yeah, I kind of want to highlight it on that, because I have actually come through bad boards before.
It's Irfaan or Lily, have you had experiences where you kind of think, oh, what is this? And you might question it, but because you might be new, you're thinking you're holding back, or you're thinking, I don't think that's right, but obviously they're practicing this or they're making decisions. How do you kind of raise this? And if you have you been kind of kicked back, or it's a bit of challenging? I think Irfaan's nodding his head. He's like, yep.
Not really much over that, but I think I want to point out something that I do notice, not very much in New Zealand, but mostly in Singapore, but it can actually exist if you go on in the near future and you're not careful. And that is the idea of tokenism. So basically just a bit of discussion about what tokenism is basically just putting somebody there, and in Singapore, what they call it is like a golden boy moment or golden girl moment, and just putting somebody who's a youth, in this case, a youth, just symbolically putting a person that is from an underrepresented community, an underrepresented person, in this case as a youth, in decision-making or organizations, without giving them the meaningful opportunity for participants to influence. While my organization, when I used to volunteer as a guest writer, was rather political organization, but I think I should probably share it as well. Having the tokenism and putting somebody that there's a youth there, and because I come from a minority community in Singapore, I'm an Indian, so the idea of tokenism being put there can be problematic, especially when it is being discussed and it is being ingrained in communities. So there is this serious issue in Singapore where people say, okay, if there's a person from a minority community getting into a certain leadership role, whether it's a minister or even as a youth community leader, convener of a youth organization, youth NGO, people would say that, you know, oh, it's just because of his race or ethnicity or his age. And this is going to be problematic because if we don't address this, then there will be a lack of genuine participation, undermining capabilities. You miss out on a lot of opportunities. So I think getting youths involved because of their genuine ability to get involved is important. The idea of tokenism can spill off to a lot of factors, like what they mentioned. The older generation of people may feel like they have a lot of experience, and so the youths may have less experience, and that could mean, you know, you are not really appreciated. You're just here to show people that a youth is present. But I think having an open discussion about that is essential. And obviously, because it's many organizations that have to effect change, we should actually get governments to be involved to actually raise awareness about the youth and how they can better contribute. And they're already doing it by creating youth parliaments, youth advisory boards. Just the other day, I was having a meeting with the Otago Community Trust, and they have a Rangatahi-led fund where it's led by one person who is a senior person who has experience in the field, and the rest of them on the board are youths. So they get to do what they want to do, they get to do what they like, and they get to advocate for what they feel strongly for. But there's always that overarching person who gives a form of support to them. So giving support, getting them genuinely involved, and moving away from appointments via tokenism is also very important to promote youth governance.
Yeah, there's lots of feedback and suggestions around that mentoring space. So looking after our rangatahi and community governance, we do that too with our Tuakana Taina program. It's chair-to-chair program. But also if you're bringing on your youth onto boards, how do you look after them? Does the chair kind of mentor that person? Do you have a support system in place? Do all the hard yards before you think, oh, I need a younger voice at the table, that kind of thing. Lily, did you have some comments to add in
Yeah,
there?
just going off what you just said, actually, the one thing it brought up for me, I've been very lucky, the boards I interact with, really good experience. But because my role is to sort of oversee every young person in the sector, that's not the case for a lot. But I'm also lucky because I'm someone that's more than willing to stand up for themselves. And there are consequences to that. Like, I have definitely been put through it because of being so outspoken. But just because of who I am, that's something I'm comfortable with. But I don't think we should have to expect that from all our young people. And we're blessed to have the community we do, because those young people can come to me and I can share those stories without exposing them. But it really shouldn't be that way. And I think if you're on a board and you have a young person, you have to be aware that they're probably not saying everything that they feel, and how are you creating opportunities for them to say those things? Because especially when what we're being taught is that actually honesty a lot of the time is met with punishment. So why would we want to keep telling the truth? So yeah, it's just, something to think about. Yeah,
that's a really insightful comment, Lily, because looking at, is it, I don't know if I've got your name wrong, but Talia, it's about, she challenges at the board table and she gets kicked back from her elders and they dislike what she's saying. But then why have young people there if you don't like what you're saying? So challenging your thinking. Something I just want to pick up a little bit about, Lily, you're talking about the structure of boards in Aotearoa. So about the nominating, seconding minutes, that kind of thing. So that is really interesting, but also there are boards and organisations who really like to use that kind of format for record keeping. So it is an interesting one. But I just wanted to explore a little bit with all of you here. What do you think the future of governance is going to look like? If we think, and feedback I get is sometimes youth don't really want to attend long meetings, do the minutes, agenda, AGMs, papers, wallpapers. How attractive is that to young people? And moving forward, is this something that young people are going to want to be in our corporate societies, our structures? How attractive is this governance space looking for youth?
I'll start then. It's not attractive. I'm gonna be quite blunt with it. It's not attractive to youth. And if I was to say yes, and it is attractive, well, I think I'd be lying there. It's not attractive to us as youth. But what I must say, and you know, and if I look into my own little globe, and tell of the future, I think it's going to be quite innovative. I think many of our youth are really creative. And I think eventually we'll get to a stage where governance may not look like what it looks like today. I do believe that we'll still hold minutes and whatnot, but I don't think it'll be in the form of written minutes of sorts. Yeah, I think when I think of an innovative way, I think rangatahi will want to make sure that it's efficient, making sure that huis are efficient. I think in terms of my group of friends, we like things being done in an efficient way. So a 3-hour, 4-hour board hui isn't the way forward for us. I think we're going to eventually time restrict it down to 1 hour, because once it starts pushing past 1 hour, you start getting tired, sleepy, and you're not in part of the hui, so it's not really that productive. So in terms of moving forward, I think if there's a one word that I could say where governance is going to move towards, it's going to be towards efficiency.
Yeah, and thinking, because you guys are young, it's probably AI, tech, you know, innovation, that kind of thing.
Yep.
We're already seeing a big movement online, so just freeing up that space, isn't it?
Yeah, and just my last comment, youth are really useful with their time these days. We want to make sure that we're doing as many activities as we can. We're not going to want to sit around in a boardroom for hours and hours. And as I've already said, so I just wanted to touch on that, because I think we're going to want to move governance to where we're heading, not where governance and the current people want to head it towards. So that's all I could say from this.
Okay, I look forward to you taking over, Tipene, in this space. So watch out. I'm just going to hand it back to my co-host, April. She's going to pick up on a couple of last questions as we're coming into the end of our talk. So over to co-host April.
Oh, yeah. I had a question around some examples. So I thought, you know, while you're all here, it'd be awesome to hear some of your experiences and examples that you've had around youth on board. So yeah, I guess the question is, for your respective sectors, is there a story or an example that you can share where having youth on the board has improved outcomes for the community, and you've seen really positive flow-on effects?
Yeah, I can start there. I'll use a couple of examples. So I have one example where it was a university setting where all the professors looked towards the governing body of Te Wairua to run a kaupapa, which was a fundraiser. And sometimes that stuff can be quite tedious, running fundraisers and whatnot. But in terms of, and I'll go back to this thing, efficiency, the time that rangatahi were able to do it within half an hour to be able to go with a plan on what they were wanting to do was a lot easier than waiting for a couple of days, couple of weeks, waiting for the chairperson to make a decision. So I think that's kind of where efficiency has come in. And then I must say, towards that fundraiser, I think 10 to 20,000, no, not 10 to 20,000, 18 to 20,000 was fundraised from that. I don't know what the specific amount was, but that's one example. Another example that I have had, and this is the grouping of people and how important it is for some of our governing bodies, is we had a youth and what they done is they done the historical issues of the governing and the marae. And a lot of their research was found to be really insightful for some of the whānau. But what that trustee done it wasn't the fact that he'd done the research and whatnot, but one of the most important roles, I believe, as a trustee is making sure that the people that have supported you are making sure that that you're making sure that they're coming back home, that they're part of the governing body, that they feel supported. And so from marae that wasn't receiving anyone attending that marae, from that youth alone, they were able to get to, I think it must have been 60 to 70 to 80 people per hui. So there was about a span of 10 hui getting people back home, where at a normal AGM, they wouldn't even been able to get 10 people arriving. So I think some of that power that the youth have, and that I've seen, has been really, really good in terms of being able to get people back onto their maraes, for example, which is a key component for those governing boards. So sorry I took too long in telling the story.
No, that's awesome. That's some really cool stories to hear. Irfaan, Lily, any stories for you as well?
Actually, this question ended up being very reflective for me, because I spent a while trying to dream up the example and actually realize that that's just not where we're at yet. But at the same time, knowing that we are laying the seeds that if we were having this conversation in a year's time, that I have no doubt we would be sharing a story. But it was actually, I appreciate this question, because it made me really stock take of, what we've been able to achieve to this point, which is being in the room, being consulted, or at least informed of everything that's going on. That's where we're at, and we're laying the seeds to now actually get outcomes for our communities, but also acknowledging that, we're just not, that's not where we're at right now.
Oh, I think that's awesome. Awesome kind of humility and awareness to have around that space, and setting the stage for what's ahead. That's really cool. Irfaan, any stories come to mind for you?
Yes, I was just, in the past few weeks, I've been talking to people in Generation Vote. Yes, it's very political. It raises awareness about politics and voting and all, but the reality is, and I observe this coming from health sciences. I'm doing health sciences first year, and I do notice a very chronic issue, I would say, in the medical term, is that students are really very disinterested in going out there to volunteer in organizations, very disinterested in contributing to their community, very disinterested in serving the community, in doing what they like. And when we ask them what they like, their answer would be, no, I don't know what I like, and it doesn't matter because I have to study. So that I believe that the idea that I was just speaking to a guy, Liam, he's from Generation Vote, he's a director at Generation Vote, and I think they do some really good work in trying to raise awareness to students about an advocacy that they really believe. So that the advocacy that they believe is that we need to get youths out there to vote. But how do we do that? We target youths, we raise awareness, and we don't just talk about voting, because voting happens once every 3 to 4 years. So the organization remains dead. But they talk about the intricacies of it. How can you get involved in voting? How can you just show up and vote? And how does your vote go? And how does it go a long way in developing the communities that you are in? They also do good work in advocacy for other youth-related activities. They partner with other youth organizations so they can extend their outreach. So I think one challenge for youths, not just for the space of youth governance, is that their intent to actually get involved in youth governance. They just don't want to get involved in it. I agree with Tipene when he says that people are really disinterested in it because it's not good. But it's really trying to get the message out there that if you don't do it, then who's going to do it? So standing up for your own advocacy, speaking up for yourself and what you seriously think is good, can actually make the tide move in your favor.
Yeah, awesome. And sounds like some good empowerment, going on around, getting young people involved in all those things. And I think it is also something for anyone to consider, and the question of capacity, as someone that's stepping up onto a board, and what's the capacity that they do have to be able to do that as well. Any more questions for you, Rose, or any you'd like to pick out from the chat?
Yeah, I think there's been great conversations coming through. A one of the recent ones I can see is around paid or otherwise compensated. So there was a neat thing over in Community Directors Australia that they have launched a campaign about paying board members and in the NGO not-for-profit sector. Something that we're really interested in is championing, like, should we be paid? How should we be compensated for our time? What do you guys think? Because it's not volunteering,
Yeah.
it's work, isn't it? We all know that. It's not like it's easy. There's lots of mahi involved in governing. So I wouldn't class us as volunteering because it's a lot of effort and time and commitment. So do you think vote pay board members?
Yeah, we're lucky because we have essentially this like shadow board made up entirely of young people where we get to test out a lot of the theories that we then want to advocate to the board to start doing. So yeah, pay has been really interesting. You know, I'm the only person in a paid role, and that has caused extreme issues for us. And so we're currently working through what compensation looks like, because we think youth get used for their expertise for free far too often, as much as anyone from any marginalized group, and it's just not good precedent setting. So yeah, I'm an absolute advocate for pay.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I kind of find it a bit hard, but yeah, I guess I'm the same as Lily. Because if I use myself, for example, I'm an advisor and a trustee on multiple Ahewhenua blocks, and my background is around trust deeds and so on and so forth. And I tend to get put on these boards to make sure I can support in establishing them, making sure that Governance 101 is being done properly. And so that's most boards tend to bring me in for that. And, you know, none of that's all paid, and nor do I want to say that I should be getting paid. But I think to make sure that people's time and their, you know, that's their skill. And if that's their skill, then I think in a part of it, they should be paid to it. But also a part of it, you know, I can only talk from my perspective, that Ahewhenua trust, that's still your land block. So you're still going to be making benefit off it nevertheless anyway. So it's quite hard, hence the reason I find it such a hard question. Yeah, I guess I'll be the same as Lily.
Yeah, I do think that being paid is not really paid, but like being compensated for your work and for your time. Because I've also spoken to a lot of youth advocates, especially those in the New Zealand International Students Association. I think they do some good work in promoting international students' education equity within New Zealand. And one thing that they do is that while the position of president is the only remunerated position, there are also other positions. The other board members are basically compensated for their travel to Wellington and Auckland for their meetings. They are compensated for their accommodations that they stay in. And so I think, yes, that's a good start for it. But yes, I'm more than happy to actually support that initiative. I think that, you know, not just youth, but anybody running a NGO should somehow be compensated for their time, for their travel, and of course for the work that they do to the community. Of course, it's nothing compared to a full-time job, but at least something.
I definitely agree that you should be covered for flights, travel, accommodation. Yeah. It is, yeah, I think it's worth having the conversation for our sector around valuing our time and commitment and how that kind of plays out. It's also interesting over in Australia, they also provide a tax incentive for our management team. So that's a really great incentive to keep skilled people in the community sector. So that's something else that community governance Aotearoa are considering for championing what we need in our sector. So it's neat to see about, you know, should we pay ourselves or at least compensate? So great to hear what you guys think. Okay, I think that is pretty much down to time. And April, do you have any last kind of final things you'd like to share? Because I want to say thank you so much to my co-host April from Community Governance Aotearoa's team. I want to thank Lily, Tipene, Irfaan for contributing so much, challenging our thinking and what in the future of governance and what that's going to look like, and what you guys are really strong advocates for what you'll kind of put up with, but what you're also wanting to do and how you'd like to contribute. So final words over to April, but thank you for joining us for board talks. So we appreciate everyone's time. Ka kite anō.
Awesome. Kia ora, Rose. Thank you. And yeah, thank you to each of you panel guests. Thanks so much for sharing your experiences and your wisdom and your insights. It's been really awesome to hear from each of you. I guess for me, final thoughts when I was thinking about youth and governance, and I think it's sort of been touched on, is it's about that initial stage of getting youth on a board, but it's also about the journey beyond when they join the board. And you know, I've heard it said that a good leader listens and listens well. And so I think humility for the board and humility for the young person to listen, to hear from each other, and also for no question to be a silly question, and to have the humility to kind of talk through perspectives that each board member has at the table, so that like Tipene was saying, you know, you can have those challenging conversations. That is where, you know, the really good outcomes come out of. So yeah, I think just to encourage anyone here just about that journey, and once you have a young person on your board, how does that kind of shift, and how do you kind of shape that space from there on out? Those would be my final thoughts. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Yeah, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Ka kite anō.